Hello, welcome to Leeds PHP. It's July and we have another meetup. So today we have a talk by Irene Sarigu, which is Introduction to Coding. And we'll be doing this in two parts because it's a bit of a longer talk. So we'll go until about somewhere between 20 past and half past, and we'll take a 5-minute break. And then we'll come back for the second half. And then afterwards, if you'd like to, you can hang around in the social and have a bit of a chat. This Big Orange Heart are supporting this event. They are a charity who promote positive mental health and well-being in remote working communities. So that's something that's obviously very important at the moment. If you'd like to also support them, there's a big orange button at the bottom of the screen. Click that and give them some money. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. In other meetup news, we are looking for people to join the leadership team. So if you fancy getting involved with the on running of the meetup, please let me know. You can either join our Slack channel and send me a direct message on there. My name is Hugh, or you can send us a message via our Twitter account or email. Any of those are fine. Email addresses on the website. If you'd like to get involved, let us know, and we'll work something out. It's a really interesting thing to get involved with. You learn lots of new skills, and it looks great on the CV as well. If you'd like to join our Slack community, we've got a fairly recently started a Slack thing, so the link is down there for it. I'll put that in the chat as well, so you don't have to type it out. If you'd like to join that, there's quite a few people on there now already.
Come talk to us, we're lovely people.
Yes, honest. And I think that's everything from me now, so we'll get Irene up.
Hello again, Irene.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to your talk all week.
Thank you.
Are you ready to get going then?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay, I think we'll kick off then.
Cool. 1 second. So I think you can see my screen, right? All right, so I'll grab. So yeah, hi, my name is Irene and welcome to my talk. This is an introduction to coding. So this talk is aimed at beginners, either like that have never seen a piece of code before, or people just starting that just want to have a chat and like understand a bit more. So we have a sort of a big schedule. That's why I wanted to have a break in the middle. We'll spend a bit of time getting our bearings, so understanding how the code that people write then gets understood by a computer, and just like that process of transforming code that we see into something that the computer can understand. We'll then go into the basics of programming, and yeah, we'll talk a bit about different languages and see that these concepts are really pretty much the same across every language. We'll then, here's when we'll take a break. I think it's like a 5 minutes break, so just like time to get a bit of water, just chill for a bit, maybe think about what we discussed before, and then we'll go into a demo. The demo will be on JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, but we'll focus mainly on the HTML and JavaScript. And then we'll finish the talk with some resources. So we'll have a look at something, some resources you can use to improve your skills, or maybe, yeah, just even get started. At the end, I think we'll have a quick Q&A, and then, of course, there is the social. So yeah, let's get started. So I don't think anyone here can read that and be like, all right, cool. Yeah, sure. That's nice. That says something. So yeah, that's exactly what we'll start with. That's written in binary. So you can't really read that easily. Even if that was the first thing you were taught at school, I don't think you could ever like write and read binary as if it was normal. English or whatever other language, but computers speak and understand binary. So we need some way that we can communicate with them that's easy for us and easy for them. So some people we know think in like a visual way, other think in words, other think maybe numbers and concepts, but the computer needs to think in binary, because inside a computer there are just many switches that are on or off, allowing or not allowing the electricity to flow through. So that's why you have zeros and ones, because those switches being on or off is what creates the 0, obviously, if it's off, and 1 if it's on. So at this point, I know because I wrote that binary. I mean, I just put it in a converter. I didn't really write it, but that says, welcome to the talk. We now need to find a way that we can write in normal English and that computer can understand. So we are moving into a very important concept, which is called abstraction. Abstraction is really important, especially in this idea that we'll talk about right now, but in computer science as a whole. So many software engineering concepts, from real, for example, architecture, to really like low down to language programming, or even simply in research. A lot of computer science is about abstraction, because there are a lot of complex ideas and concepts that we need somehow to put into simpler bits and to allow us to communicate them effectively, easily, and cleanly to a computer. So abstraction is a very big topic in computer science, and I just wanted to touch upon it. And like, if you are just starting as a beginner, you'll see this today, but like throughout your career, you will see so much more, because it's just like a very big concept. So now that I've said that, going again closer to what we were speaking before. So we saw that we had binary, which is basically what the hardware layer stands for. But we need to write in languages like Python or like Java to allow us to be able to communicate our instructions effectively. So we've got different levels, and the lower you go towards the hardware, the more complex it becomes for us. But obviously, the simpler it becomes for the computer. And the higher up you go towards the higher level language, the more abstract it becomes. So if we go very quickly and have a look at this. Now, depending on, this may be your very first talk and you've maybe never written a line of code. So I made this very simple so that everyone can understand this. If it's a bit too simple for you, I understand, I'm sorry about that, but it was just to like demonstrate a very quick concept. So as we can see here, we have an high-level language. I think this is C. So we are doing something very simple. We're just defining 3 variables. One is called 5, one is 4, and we've got the assignment of the corresponding number to the variable. So we're assigning 5 to 5, the variable 5, and 4 to the variable 4. And then we add them together. And this just looks very normal. Even if you're not a very competent programmer, or if you're just getting started, this looks really easy because it's written in a high-level language. Now, if we try to go down a tiny bit, even just to the assembly language, we can see this massive piece of code coming up here. So we won't worry about too much about that area. This is just the variables being initialized. And we'll just move on to these lines down here, because this bit, it might be a bit too complicated, but if we just focus on this, it's just what this is doing. So as you can see, just looking at it without me even needing to say anything, it just looks a lot more complicated. For the high-level language code, I didn't probably even need to explain it to you. Even if you're not a programmer, you can probably read and understand it. For this, it just looks very complicated. So these tiny move edx and then all of these is simply signifying to move that 5 into a register, which is just a container in the computer memory. So that's all it's doing. So that's the first line pretty much there. And the second one does the same, but for the for variable. So it does pretty much the same, but can you imagine writing these over and over in your code just to say that it needs to assign that for to a register? And then this add just adds them together. And then we move them into a new variable that here for some reason is called 7 because I made a mistake before and didn't correct the screenshot. But it should actually just say 9 like here. So it doesn't look too complicated, but there are very easy places where you could go wrong. For example, that is EAX, and that's basically because you're adding the numbers together and then storing them in that register, not in that register. So as you can see, I haven't moved on to something like we've just add a 1-level jump. It's nothing big. We haven't even gone to machine language, but it already looks so much more complicated, and it just doesn't look easy to write. So that's why abstraction is really important, and the idea that there are several levels that a computer has to go through before producing that binary is really important, because we need to be able to write code that it's easy for us and that can be easily converted down into binary. So yeah, this was just quick introduction into explaining how the code that you write gets understood by the computer. So we've now found out how the communication works, how what we say gets translated into computer code. But what do we communicate with computers? So this is where you'll probably hear a lot during your getting started into coding, or even just reading around the word algorithm. And it's usually the first time I heard about it, I already heard about it from other people, and nobody really explained it. And it was just this massive word which seemed to be so difficult to understand. I'm here to tell you it's really, really easy. There's nothing complicated about the word algorithm, even though it seems like it's such a big, complicated word. It just means that you have one action that you would like to achieve, and you write the steps in a clear, defined way to achieve that action. So this definition is from Wikipedia, and I like it a lot. It just explains that it needs to have certain characteristics to be an algorithm. But if you look at it, it just says that there needs to be a finite sequence. So it must not be an infinite sequence that never ends. It needs to be computer implementable. So again, thinking about that going down to binary, it must be possible for the computer to take an action and follow it through without causing any errors. It will solve the a task of a specific problem or perform a computation, again, just like from a specific set of things that you want to do, it must achieve something else that you want to do, a goal. And the part that I really like about this explanation is the final sentence. Algorithms are always unambiguous. I feel like this is very important because humans in their own language, we have so much context that we usually abstract away. We sometimes say some things and the person in front of us just understands us. We don't need to give them a lot more context. It's just clear for them what we mean. Well, computers are not like that. And even when a computer has to do something, it must only have one way to do it. The way to do it must be specified. There must not be a lot of things that you ask the computer to do and then a lot of different ways to do it. It's a bit hard to understand with it, but there must be an unambiguous instruction set. So if you say add, that's unambiguous because the computer knows that it needs to add two numbers together. So yeah, I think we will watch a video now just to understand a bit more why instructions must be unambiguous and why it's so important to have a clear instruction. Yeah, if we want to play the video.
Step 1, get two
Sorry, let's
pieces of
have a
bread
stop
out.
for a second.
Got 'em. Get a butter knife and get some PB. Take one piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
No, Dad, with the peanut butter.
I'm just doing what it says. It says take one piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
Hold on.
Get some jelly, rub it on the other half of the bread.
No, Dad, open the jelly.
Well, it doesn't say to do that. Put the breads together on top of each other. Take a big bite. This doesn't taste like a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Fail.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I had to make it extremely specific.
Oh, good. I'm starving.
All right, so as you could see, that was a family just trying to understand how important instructions are. So obviously the instruction set that the child gave to the dad wasn't exactly perfect. And that's exactly what a computer goes through if you try to send an instruction set which isn't clear. The computer can't do what you think it will do. The computer will only do what you tell it to do. It will. That's why sometimes when there are errors, we think, oh no, what's wrong? There must be something wrong. It's not me. But actually, the computer will not do something that you don't tell it to do. It will just follow your instruction to the letter. So that I felt that was quite important to introduce, because it's really easy to just get a bit lost, but actually it's just really easy that you just need to give the right set of instructions. So that aside, we've introduced a bit of how computers understand and the translation needed between binary code and the code that we write. We had a look at algorithms. Now I just wanted to go over the basics of programming, like really quickly. I guess we'll have a very quick switch through, because then we'll see in the demo a lot of these basics are introduced in the code, so we can talk about them in the demo as well. So I feel this is very important because it's obviously not an extensive set of basics. I just wanted to cover a few things, and I've seen many people online or even in forums asking, is it important which language I get started with? Is there a best language to get started in programming? If I learn one language, will I not be able to move to another one? And I feel like once you understand the basics and understand and being able to put them in practice and being able to maybe even explain them to someone else, it's important to understand that these are common across all languages. All languages will have a specific syntax. You will have operators, you will have functions. Maybe not all languages will have indentation, but we'll go through that a bit. If statement, that's a lot of these things are very common between languages. So there's no need, from my opinion, to just get lost in trying to start with the perfect language. As long as you get started and have a basic understanding, then you can probably move to another language quite easily, just having a look at the syntax and how it works. Obviously, if you get to a level where you're an expert, let's say in Java, and then one day you decide, oh, actually, I want to move to Python and leave all Java behind, you might not be an expert in Python straight away. Not because your programming skills aren't high, but because there is a difference between the two languages. It's just like getting used to it. But once you have the set of basics with you and you understand them, then it's okay to move from one language to another. So I wouldn't get too much stuck on choosing the right language. Yeah, so let's move on. So we'll have a very quick look at all of them, and then we'll take a quick break, and then we'll go through the demo. So variables, really, really easy. We've seen them before in the high-level programming language, and also in the previous snippet of code with the 7 and 4 and 9 and 5. Sorry, I don't know why I said 7. So you just use them to store information. So usually a healthy dog has 4 legs. So let's say that you're writing a program about a dog. You just use that var dog legs, which will be the variable, to set it to 4. That simple, that easy. You can change that then. If the dog becomes unhealthy, make changes to that variable. But yeah, really easy. Syntax is something, a combination of words, punctuation, symbols that define a specific programming language. So different programming languages will have different set of syntaxes. So some languages have curly brackets, some languages have just indentation, for example, which we'll talk about later. So it's really just important to understand that these punctuation and symbols, for example, in JavaScript, when you open a curly brackets, a lot of the time means that you are opening for a big piece of code that then needs to be closed. So in a function, for example, you will have an open curly bracket, and then at the end of the function, you will close it. And that just lets the computer understand that that block of code is opened and closed. It's really that simple. It's allowing the computer to understand that the code that you're writing isn't one very, very long line. Because if we think back to binary, the computer needs somehow to understand that there is a difference between one line and the other. So you need to have some sort of separation that allows the computer to see that it's not one single file, that's it, there is no stop, and we'll just go through it. So that's why syntax and punctuation, going back to thinking of how the computer thinks, is important. Then you have operators, and there are 3 sets, I would say. You have mathematical, logical, and Boolean operators. Mathematical is really easy. We saw that 5, we did it before in the code, 5 plus 4 is 9. You can perform all sorts of operation. That's really literally maths. Logical is about just checking equivalence, checking whether it's greater or smaller than a certain value, checking whether it's completely equal or just not equal at all. So that sort of thing, we'll look at it again in the code, I think, about logical, but it's a main thing to check for equivalence, greater than or smaller than. Boolean operators, again, really simple. It checks whether things can be ANDed or whether two variables are either one or the other on. So this is a bit more complex to explain. I don't know whether we have any code with that, but I can try to see if anyone has any questions later, try to answer them maybe in a clearer way. Functions are basically, let's call it containers of code that achieve a task. So if you have a very specific task that you want to achieve, obviously, when you're just getting started, you might not see the need of dividing code in functions. But if you're working in a large company, small company, or even if you're just like working with someone else on a big task, you can't put everything in the same function, in the same file, because things will get muddled up really easily. Variables will get muddled up, everything will become a bit of a mess. So the way that people handle this is divide everything up into functions, very simple functions that achieve a very specific task. Nothing going in the middle, nothing half achieved, not achieved. So yeah, they're just containers of code that achieve a task. Indentations is something that most programmers want because it makes the code look clean, and it's specifically needed in some programming languages like Python. And indentation is basically this line between this space between the start of a function, for example, and when you're actually in the function. And again, that's something that makes the computer understand, all right, cool, the function has been declared, now let's go into it. So again, we are working on a computer, trying to ensure that the computer understands us and we understand it. Yeah. Comments, I'm just aware of time. We'll look at comments later as well, but it's something that the computer doesn't see as code, so it won't execute that code. But it helps the programmer to understand what's going on. And usually, especially at the start, if it's quite hard to have a file of code and then notes on the other side. So if you document your code very well and you explain what each function is for, what each variable is for, then it makes it so much easier for you to understand later on when you go back and look at the code, what the code was actually doing. We'll go really quickly through loops. You have two types of loops. Here we'll talk about for loops and while loops. A for loop is just something that runs for a specified number of times, and we'll see these in the demo. And while loops are basically loops where there is a condition, and if the condition is true, then the while loop will keep running. As soon as the condition is false, it will stop. So it's just something that checks whether a condition is true constantly. If statement is something that checks, say that you have two different pieces of code, one that needs to be executed if a condition is true, and the other one if the condition is false. So that's the if statement orchestrates these division of tasks, let's call it like that. And again, we'll see if statements later, so that's why I'm kind of rushing through this, because you'll have a way to see it in the code as well. Data types. So data types, I've only included a few because I'm pretty sure there are other things that could be considered data types and that could be included in the list. Maybe not, maybe yes, it depends how you see it, but yeah, pretty much. I've included these ones for now because I think it's enough for this talk. So we have string, characters, int, float, boolean, and array and lists. So a string is literally any combination of letters, symbols, and numbers all together, and we'll see them in the demo. A character is a single letter, so literally one single letter. And hint is a whole number, so you will have, for example, 3 or 4 or whatever single number you can think of, or like 120. It's not a decimal number, pretty much. A float is a decimal number, so maybe think a reduced version of pi. That could be 3.414, so that could be a float. A boolean is a true or false value, so literally, yeah, true or false. And then we've got array and lists, which are a way to contain collections of elements. So we'll see again a lot of these, maybe not all of them, but a lot of these in the demo. So that's why I rushed a bit in there. So yeah, I think we'll take a break now and get back for the demo, if that's all right.
Hello again, everyone. Thank you for bearing with. So we're going to kick off with the second half of the talk now, and we'll hopefully see a practical demonstration of some of the concepts that Irene's just been talking about. After that, we'll do a brief question and answer. So if you can think of any questions, stick them in the chat, and we'll field the good ones. And then afterwards, we'll stay for a bit of a social if anyone wants to hang around. So back over to you then, Irene.
So yeah, getting ready for the demo. So before we start with the code, I think it's important to describe what we're actually doing. So what we're aiming towards is something like this. So let's say that we're a user that we just received a parking ticket. Not great, I know. So we've been fined a certain amount, and we've been fined in a certain location, and we want to work out how much we need to pay. So very simple, but even this very simple sort of introduction will let us understand a lot of the different concepts that we've been talking about. So going back to the slides, I've done two sets. So we have, as a programmer, we have two sets of clients. So we have the council, that they are the ones that want to set the fines. So they define the rules, and we need to follow them and tell them to the user pretty much. And then we have the users on the other side, which are the person getting fined for parking in the wrong places. So we have something called so we have some sort of rules that we want to respect. So as the council would like to charge the user £100 if they get tickets in certain locations. In any other location than the one specified, they would like to charge them an additional £50. So on top of their fine, they want £100 more if they get charged in those locations. Otherwise, just £50 more. Obviously, these are just random numbers. I don't really drive, so I don't know how much people pay in parking tickets fines, but I hope it's not this much. They also want as a main aim to allow the users how much they need to pay online. So that's why we're developing this app, to allow the users to understand how much they need to pay. Obviously, this is a very, very simple app. So you wouldn't even need to have this app, but it's just an important point to just get started and understanding some key concepts. As the person receiving the fine, I would like to know how much I have to pay, and understand how much where I live affects my fines, my finances, and my bank account, because obviously it's quite a lot of difference. So we'll be using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to achieve what we've just shown, which is this. So yeah, I think we'll get on to it. We will also be using Visual Studio Code, which is an IDE, and it's basically an IDE is just an environment where you can write your code and see the files that you're using and see how every file is connected to another. So if you have different folders that you need to go in, it's really nice. I really like it for the interface. So if you're getting started, probably easier things will work as well. But Visual Studio Code is free. It's got a nice interface, so I definitely recommend it. We'll be using the Chrome browser. That's just pretty much a personal preference. You can use any browser. And within the Chrome browser, we'll be using DevTools. So I will just show you why I like the Chrome browser. So this is Safari, and Safari is fine. Any browser is fine. The thing I don't particularly love is the developer tools in Safari. It's just, as you will see them, they're very similar to the ones in Chrome. I just don't like the interface. And I've seen many people using Chrome as well for similar reasons. So yeah, that's pretty much it, why we're not using Safari, just personal preference. But you can use anything you've got on your computer. If you can't install Chrome, anything else is fine. So let's go to Chrome. So something that I think is really important here is I will just show you the developer tools. So I will just run through this very quickly. It's something that every developer, at least that I know, uses. Is really important, and it helps you a lot when you're getting started as well. So, so this is the tools to open it. I just go inspect, and then you will see the inspection of the web page that you're on. Right now we're in Elements. It shows you all the elements of the web page, of the HTML. If you try these on any other proper page, like, I don't know, Twitter or Facebook, you won't see as much detail. But that's just because they're written probably in a framework or more advanced code. So don't worry about that. But for getting started, you will see everything that you write here, especially if it's a simple JavaScript and HTML file. So yeah, that's all our HTML5 that we'll see in the IDE later. You've got a console, which is really useful for debugging JavaScript. Sources, right now, again, you can see everything, all the code that has been written, everything. If you go on a proper page, this will be protected, so you won't be able to see everything. And it will be usually written in some kind of way that even if you do see some function, you can't read them. So yeah. We've got the network. This is really useful as well when you're making requests, but let's not go too far ahead of ourselves. And then there's some other tabs. We will not use them. In fact, we won't even use network or sources. We'll mainly use elements and console today. So don't really need to worry about any of those. Just wanted to quickly introduce them to you. But yeah, no need to worry about memory or performance or even network today, to be honest. Yeah. So let's get started. So if you've been to any other meetup, you probably see people not coding in live streams, and it's for a very good reason. Sometimes you get something really, really easy wrong and you can't find it, and you know, it just makes a mess. And yeah. So we won't do any live coding, but I'll run through the code. We'll go through it all together, and yeah, I hope if there is any questions, I can always answer them in the end. Again, this is for very beginners, so we'll go through things very kind of slowly, and yeah, it's not supposed to be really hard. So no worries if it's a bit boring for some more advanced people. So yeah, let's get started. We've seen comments before, and this is how you comment in HTML. Really easy. You open it and you close it, and this way you can document your code. And if you forget in the future what the app was about, you can just go back here and quickly read it. So yeah, that is how you comment in HTML. We've got this doctype HTML, which just describes that the document is an HTML5 document. So again, really easy. This is just a single tag. You don't close it. It's a standalone tag. Then we start the document. So the HTML is what defines the web page. So we start the document. And one thing that it's important to mention here, and this goes for HTML, JavaScript, Python, anything at all. Once you open something, just advice, close it straight away. Obviously, in the code now, you can't see that I closed it straight away, but it can cause so much problems after, especially if you're a beginner and you forget to close something and you run the page and it doesn't show anything, or it shows everything really messed up. One way that you can avoid that is open and close everything straight away. Don't wait. It'll just save you so many troubles after. So yeah. So we start the document, the HTML document, and then we have two main parts, the head and the body. So you can think of the head as the brain. So here is where all the things that you won't see in the page directly go. So you will have any imports. So for example, here we're importing the CSS file, and here we're importing the JavaScript file. So you can't see them directly in the page, but obviously they're necessary for the page. So here's where you do all your imports. And as you can see, when you import files, you just specify what kind of type they are and what they're used for. So that's the way you import a CSS file, and that's the way you import a JavaScript file. We've also got this title, which is shown, not here, here. So that's where you've got the shown title. So yeah, easy. Yeah, let's go back to the code. All right, cool. So going back into the body, where the head is the brain, the body is the actual things that can be seen on the web page. So you will see a body, and it's just a container for everything that will be in the page. So you've got a div, and here a div is a section of everything that goes in the body. So you will have probably a lot of divs in a page. Now we've only put one here because it's not a very large application. It's nothing massive. But you, if you, for example, have one for cars and one for motorcycle, you could probably have two divs, and one for motorcycle and one for a car. I don't know if motorcycles have tickets, but I don't know. Yeah. So inside this div, we have a heading, a label, and an input type. And we'll just go back to the page to relate to them. So that's the heading. And as you can see, that's very big because that's an H1. We've got the label for the input type, and the input here is you can write anything you want. And then another label for the second input type that is for the location. We then have a button, and then we have another heading. So if we go back here, we can see the label and the input type for text for the first fine amount. And then we've got the label again and an input type for the location that you got your fine in. Then we have a smaller heading because it's an H2. So if you were to change this down to an H4, that would be even smaller. So yeah, that's just headings can go to be very big or very small depending on what you need. So yeah, we have a button, and here the button, when you click it, it performs the action specified in this function. So as you can see, we've just defined a very easy CSS HTML file, sorry. I won't talk a lot about the CSS because I think we don't have so much time, but basically you have, as you can see, this is not a very bland without color page. This has a lot of color, and this is just given by the CSS here. So it's just specified. It's not a very long file, but you can see that it defines the colors, the sizes of the padding, the margins, and everything. I can show you quickly what it would look like if we had no CSS, because it wouldn't look very good. So now we remove the CSS. We'll just save the page and reload the page. That's what it would look like. So you can see how important styling is, especially for a user. If you see something like this, and maybe there is a button to pay somewhere where it directs you to a secure page to pay your fine, you probably would be, this is a bit sketchy. I don't like this. It doesn't look safe. But a simple change in interface, and it just looks a lot. It's not even a complex interface. It doesn't have any proper colors. It's not designed by a proper designer, but it just looks a lot more normal, less sketchy. So yeah, that was just to highlight the importance of CSS. We won't talk about it again today because we don't have time, but yeah, just wanted to make that point. So Moving on to JavaScript. I'll just quickly show you that this is a single line comment in JavaScript. This is a multi-line comment in JavaScript. You usually use this if you've got to explain a couple of things, and maybe you want to press enter between the lines, because otherwise it just goes across the page and it just doesn't look nice sometimes. So if you've got a lot to say, use these. You can also use comments on double lines, so you could also do it like that, but this is usually the thing that is used for multi-line comments. So we talked about functions before, and we said that functions are a way to encapsulate and contain a bit of code that performs a specific action. Here we only have one single function, and you can see it's very long. Probably it shouldn't be this long. It can be made shorter a lot of ways, but to keep it simple and easy for everyone to understand, it was better to write it out as clearly and longly as possible. So that's why it's so long. Sorry about that. So yeah, this function gets called every time this button gets clicked. So every time you click the button, this onClick will call the function in that file. All right, so nothing complex there. I can see there's been some changes. I touched something. All right, cool, never mind. So let's get started. So we define the function, and here you would usually put any inputs that are needed for the function to work, but we don't have any, so we won't put any. In JavaScript, as you can see, we've got semicolons, we've got curly brackets. Yeah, so just something to be aware. If you're from a Python background, or if you started looking at Python, it looks a bit different, the syntax, but it's pretty much, it does the same thing as we said before. So let's get started. We initialize the final amount for the fine to be paid as 0. Basically, this variable will work as a counter that everything that you add on top of it, it will just get added to this function. We then have a Boolean for the expensive city. So if you remember, we saw back in the, don't remember which, yeah, we saw back here that if you live in Leeds, Liverpool, London, or Manchester, you have to pay an additional £100. Anywhere else, you just have to pay an additional £50. So it's important to define these. It's a long way to do things, but it shows us a couple of things. And if you remember, that's a Boolean because it will either take the value of false or true. So obviously, when the user enters some data, we need some way to access that data. So the way that we do it is that we get the document that we're using. So it will be this. And we say, in the document, go and find the element called that has an ID of current amount. So if we copy here and we look here, the current amount is where you would say the fine amount that you currently have. So in this input, the code will go and get the amount that you type for this input. So the code will get that. Whatever you enter here will be, sorry, this variable. So that's really easy. And then we want the value of that. So here, if I do a very easy, quick console log, you will see, I am in here, let's go. So you will see that there is a problem. Obviously, this will work out everything because I didn't stop it. You will see that that is a different color from that. And that is because that's a number and that's a string. So if you remember from back in the talk, a string is a combination of numbers, characters, any letters, any words, anything like that. So even though you enter the number here, that is seen as a string. In fact, if I was to go back to the code and remove this, I will show you what happens. This line is basically what converts that string into a number. So if I now run the code like this, hoping that I didn't break anything else in the process, of course I'm going to the wrong window, and we'll do this again. Yeah, let's go 100. You will see what happens. Obviously, that's wrong. That's not possible. Like, no combination of numbers that we had will ever produce that. And that's because it's seen everything as a string, instead of as a number. And JavaScript does this lovely thing that strings can be added to numbers and stuff. So yeah, going back, putting this back in, you can now start to understand why the type and the data types are really important, because obviously now we're in a safe environment. If we do this, we see straight away that it's an issue, and it's easy to notice that that's the issue that's occurring. But if you've got a large application, it's not so easy to see that there is just a string not being converted into a number. So yeah, just wanted to quickly touch on that. You always need to convert to a number if you are receiving a string. So yeah, once we do that, then we can see, of course, in the code that gets converted into a number. And this is just the same as before. So as before, we declare a variable and we assign it to the document and find the element by ID, find location. So if we go back to our HTML page, we can see that find location is here, and that just retrieves the location that we set. So with a user set. So right now we know that the find location, we have the find location, we have the current amount, so we can get started. If we remember, you need to pay an additional £100 if you live in some cool cities. Otherwise, for any other city, you just need to pay an additional £50. So we can already get started by adding, using this operator, the add operator, the current amount, which is what we currently have as our fine, to the final amount, which is this 0 now. So initially, the final amount is 0. So we know that the final amount in this moment is just equal to the current amount. I just wanted to do it like this because it's clear that it shows that there is that second step. So obviously, when we'll go back to the page, we will see any intermediate step, and this is really good. When you're developing, debugging, doing anything really, it's good to have console logs in the code so that you can see where you're at, if there is any problem in intermediate calculations, in intermediate data that you're receiving back from somewhere. It's just a really good way to debug your code even before you have a problem. So if you're getting started, use console logs as much as possible to even just help you understand where you're at. So yeah, now we'll just introduce this array of the expensive locations. So back in the ticket, we had Leeds, Liverpool, London, and Manchester, I believe. We just put them here so that we know that if the user is in any of these, they need to pay more. So that is an array. Up until now, we've seen a function, variables, booleans, integers, strings, operators, syntax. So we've just covered a lot of the bases that we talked about before, and it's quite smooth. Like, you don't need to think about it too much. It just if you look at the code, it's just a simple application and it just looks quite okay, I think. So we define the array, and here is where potentially it gets a bit more complicated. So we have a for loop and then an if statement. We have this for loop which says, if you remember, we need to check if the location is an expensive location. So one way that we can do it is this one. So the for loop will go through all the list, all right? And this is how it goes through all the list. And then it will check if the location is equal to locations, it's equal to if the location that you got the fine in is equal to any of the location indicated here. And now I'll explain it a bit more because that was a bit confusing for me as well. So the way it does it is, all right, it says, let's initialize this variable location to 0. And then as long as the variable location is smaller than this array length, then increase the variable. All right. So that might have sounded still a bit confusing, but we'll go through it now. So it basically, in computers, arrays and lists start at 0. So this will be the 0 item, that will be 1, that will be 2, that will be 3. So for each location, it will say, all right, now location has a value of 0. And we know that that's referred to Leeds. So it will say if the find location, so the location that you got find in, is equal to location at position 0, so Leeds, then set the expensive city variable, which we have here that was initialized to false. We set it to true. And this is just a flag because while we go through the list, obviously we'll only have one, there will only be one city from the list. So we want to know whether the city, whether it's an expensive city or not. So we just set a flag. We don't do anything at the moment. We don't add the £100. Don't do any of that. We just set a flag to let the computer know that it is an expensive city, the city where we got the fine. So that's really easy. So all this does is go across the list for every single item. It checks whether the item you entered is the same as the position, the current position. So it goes through each of them. And if it finds a match, it sets these expensive cities to true. Otherwise, nothing happens. As you can see, you could probably remove the else, but we're just going to keep it simple, keep it very clean, and leave the else here. But as you can see, if it's true, then it sets the expensive city flag to true. Otherwise, do nothing. Just go to the next location until there are no more locations to check because we've got to the end of the list. So when there are no more locations to check, it'll just exit the for loop and we'll just be done. At this moment in time, we will be able to check whether we were on an expensive city or not. Because if you remember, we set that to true if we were on an expensive city. So when you console log at this point, you will see either a true or a false, depending on whether this flag was set. So now it's where it gets a bit interesting. So if the flag was set to true, so if you were living in Leeds, Liverpool, London, or Manchester, then the final amount will have a £100 more. So if you can remember from here, initially we set the final amount to 0 plus the fine amount that you just got. So at this point, this variable is equal to whatever fine you received. When you get here, we take that previous, just the fine, just that. We add 100 and we reassign it to the same variable. So really easy. Just think about it as you're adding initially the fine amount and then this additional cost based on where you're located. And then obviously, if it wasn't set, so if you're in any other city, you will only have £50 more. So yeah, that was pretty much it. You then console log the final amount that you received. So this is just like the very, very final amount. Whatever you will receive at the very end, what you will need to pay. And then we do something really cool. So we say, document get element by ID, and we use this final fine amount. So if we look in the code for this, you will find that it's this, just an H2, a heading that it's empty. So initially, when you don't insert any data, it says you have to pay, and then I don't know if you noticed, but let's go back to it. It just says you have to pay. There's no amount specified. It just knows that you're a bad person and you need to pay. So now we are. Why? All right, cool. Yeah, we're back. So now we're setting this final fine amount in using the HTML and getting that HTML and setting it as that variable that we just assigned it to. So we specifically say, all right, you've got some empty element, HTML element, give it to me, I'll do something to it. So yeah, that is pretty much it. So we've seen a function, variables, different data types. We've seen how to get data from the document and how to set some data back in the document. And we've seen that we can use console logs, if statements, for loops, and everything to achieve what we want to achieve. So let's go back here, not here, here, and see if everything that we programmed works. So I think that maybe £1,000 is too much. Let's just leave it with 100. And let's just test it and see if, for example, if you put Leeds, what happens? Oh, I didn't change that. You see why people don't do any changes in the code. Yep. So, sorry. We put that we want to pay £100 in Leeds. And now you see that we have to pay £200 in total because, of course, Leeds is one of those expensive cities. But if we put something like York, then that's fine because it's not an expensive city. And yeah, you only have £150 more. As you can see, let's make this a bit bigger. I'll run this again because otherwise it's a bit confusing. That expensive city boolean is set to false. So that's why you have that £50 being added rather than £100. If we then go back to Leeds, then that's set to true. And that's why when you're back in the code, it will say, yeah, this is set to true. Where is it? This is set to true. So it will need to be, the final amount will need to be that. So yeah. So we've seen that, we've seen this. Yeah, so some things, depending on how experienced you are, how long you've been looking at code, you might define yourself as a beginner, even though you're not a beginner. So depending on how much code you've seen, the demo might have been too easy, but I felt it was just important to include everyone and, you know, have some very beginnerish points. If you do feel like you need to look through the code again, I will post it on somewhere. I haven't posted it on anywhere yet, but I will post it on somewhere. And if you follow me on Twitter, I'll just put a message when I've posted it on somewhere, so you can just have a look at it again. And the final thing is, of course, the code was written as easily as possible for people to follow through. So there were a couple of things that can be written in a nicer, cleaner way, a lot smaller. You don't need the else, for example, if it's not doing anything. But it felt it was quite important for people to just have as clean code as possible. Cool. So sorry, thought you lost me. Yeah, this is pretty much it. If you have any questions, this might be the right time to ask them, I think. Yeah. Sorry about that final losing Mac.
Yeah, it's easily done.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. If anyone has any questions, stick them in the chat and we'll ask them. So far, we've just got the one question, which is that if you spell the name of your city wrong, is it going to crash?
So yeah, that is an interesting question. If you spell the name of your city wrong, it's not going to crash, because if we think about it, the computer is only checking whether the city will be in that list. So it's not going to crash, but if you spell Leeds wrong with only one E, it's just not going to fine you the additional £50. So I don't know, it could be an interesting way to pay a smaller fine. Yeah. So no, it's not going to crash. Again, the computer will just do what you tell it to do. It will just go through the list, not find it, and then just fine you the reduced amount.
Question from Steve. Do you have any useful resources for beginners?
I do. Sorry, I didn't share them. I will. Can I have them? Yes. So sorry. I don't know why I didn't share them. All right. Resources part. Sorry about this, everyone. All right. So these are a couple of online resources that might be very useful. I'll just go through them really quickly. Free Code Camp is absolutely amazing. I think it's one of the best resources that you can have. There are loads of, you get a certificate at the end, but the fact that you need to complete, you do the lessons pretty much. Then at the end of each lesson of like the program of lessons, you've got 5 sort of mini applications that you need to write. And in those applications, you just consolidate your knowledge so much. And at the end, once you submit the code, it gets checked and you get a certificate, whether you, stating that you spent 300 hours working on that. And I can say that it is true. You probably even spend more than that amount of time. But yeah, it's an amazing resource. If you're looking to get started, that's really good. Solo Learn is really nice. It's an application for the phone. I think they've got the, yeah, in fact, they do. They've got the desktop web browser as well. On the phone, I used it a bit ago, but basically you could do the courses, you get a certification. But the really cool thing that they have is that they have sort of quizzes. You can challenge each other. So you get points at the end if you win. So there are 5 questions that you ask another random person, and who gets it right wins pretty much, and you get some points. EDABIT is pretty much, you get some questions, it's some problems that you need to solve. It can be something like you have a list of number, put them in order, and they get harder as you progress. Future Learning, Udacity, and EDX are pretty much lectures from university courses. You just follow them, learn a lot of things. That is really cool as well. And Stack Overflow, obviously, if you have any questions, you can ask them. People usually are quite nice in the community, but usually you don't even need to ask the questions, because if you Google well enough, someone will have your problem before you. So yeah. Other resources which are not online, sorry, I'll run through this very quickly. I know I kind of forgot about the slides. So you've got meetups. So if you're here, you're already one step ahead than most people are. Some people don't even realize there is this amazing community online that can support, and we're so loving. We support each other so much. Conferences, college university courses. And here I don't mean just a bachelor degree or anything like that. There are some universities which, even for free, they just have some courses on, and you can join them no matter where you are with your career or anything. Twitter, people tweet a lot of stuff. Books, yeah, hackathons and pair programming. If you have any friends that are already in the field, it's amazing how much you can learn by just looking at the code. So yeah. And yeah, so I don't know whether that answered your question well enough, Steve. I hope yes.
Yep, you said that's great.
Cool.
I personally find following specific speakers on Twitter is a really brilliant way of finding out lots of new things to do with all aspects of technology, really.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can learn. Yeah.
Cool. So there's another question just come in. Do you ever use PHP Storm?
I do. I do use PHP Storm. When I used PHP, I used PHP Storm. I found it really good. It really depends what you're working on, really. Sometimes if you're working, like sometimes if I'm writing a very simple Python script, I won't even open VS Code. I'll just write it in Nano or Vim from the terminal, or just like simple, really sad text edit, the simplest thing you can find on your computer without even needing to install anything. So yeah, I use it really depends what I'm doing, to be honest. Depending on what I'm doing, I use different tools.
Cool. I think that's all the questions then. And Emmanuel has mentioned that you can also join the Slack when we can help with code advice and mistakes and stuff.
Yeah, that definitely, yeah. There are so many Slack channels as well. And of course, if you are in the Leeds PHP Slack channel, I assume if you have any question on anything else, people are usually happy to answer them. So yeah.
Yep, of course. Okay, so I think that's everything now in terms of questions and stuff. So if anyone wants to hang on for the social, please do. Before we do leave as well, we do have a little bit of sad news as well, and that this is going to be Mark's last meetup with us as part of the leadership team. Mark has been doing this for over a year now and has been instrumental to keeping Leeds PHP running online. It's been really appreciated, the amount of work that he's done behind the scenes. So thank you for that, Mark, and wish you the best going forwards. I'm sure we'll see you around at future meetups and various things. But, yeah.
Absolutely. So basically, I just got a new job in a new city, and it's difficult to coordinate everything now. But certainly, I'll be around for doing talks and whatnot, and attending the odd meetup.
It's important to mention that Mark isn't leaving because it's horrible being an organizer. So
No.
an organizer. Join the team.
No, it's actually a great learning experience. It's good for improving your organizational skills, and it's really good to be an active part of the community. So I'd certainly recommend others if they're interested in applying.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I think that's it for us today then. If you want to hang around for the social, please do. And thank you, Irene, for speaking tonight. We'll see you all at the next one, hopefully.